Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for attending this afternoon's virtual field day where we're going to be exploring some urban streams and riparian areas, both here in Ames, where I'm currently located, and over in the Coralville, Iowa City area. I'd like to thank all of you who have attended any of our previous events and provided feedback on those events. We do appreciate any comments and suggestions that you provide to us. Being in the field allows our speakers to address items that they might not think of when they're looking at still images in a PowerPoint. Hence, we're providing some recorded field video for these events. A little bit about the Iowa Learning Farms. If you're new to our organization, we were established in 2004. Our goal is to build a culture of conservation by working with farmers and researchers to implement practices that improve water quality and soil health while remaining profitable. Our partners include the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, US EPA Section 319, Conservation Districts of Iowa, Iowa Farm Bureau, Practical Farmers of Iowa, GrowMark, the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, Iowa Corn, and the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. Just a bit of housekeeping here before we dive into the content of today's event. Please do keep your video off and muted during the video portions of today's event, and while the speakers are presenting following that. But then we invite you to unmute and ask your questions aloud to encourage dialogue amongst those that are attendees today. To help continue improving future events, we will be sending you an email evaluation following this the end of today. So it's just the start of the conversation. So please do share the information from today with those that weren't able to make it. We will be posting a recording of today's event on our website. So if you know someone that couldn't make it but was interested in watching it, they'll be available. That link will be in the evaluation email as well. So please do send that back. Our speakers today include Jan Thompson, Iowa State University Morrill Professor of Natural Resources Ecology and Management, and Aaron Gwinnup, Water Resources Engineer from Emmons Olivier Resources, Inc. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and queue up our first video here.
Hi, I'm Jan Thompson. I'm a professor in the Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management at Iowa State University. I'm an urban ecologist, and so I'm interested in natural systems in urban areas specifically, and I'm interested in forests, and I'm interested in streams, and any kind of natural features that are largely left as remnants in urban landscapes. We're here in Daly Park in the city of Ames. Daly Park is on the western edge of Ames. It was called Daly Park and Greenbelt, but it never had a greenbelt until 2006. When we designed a project that was funded by the EPA to demonstrate different water quality protection measures. So we demonstrated channel protection, and this site is all about channel protection. We installed a modest urban riparian buffer on this site to make the greenbelt a true greenbelt. We also looked at infiltration practices in residential settings, which included installation of a number of rain gardens. And we also looked at filtration practices. So we were working cooperatively with both the City of Ames Parks and Recreation Department, Public Works Department, and Iowa State University Facilities Planning and Management. So with Iowa State Facilities, we were looking at a sand filter that they installed adjacent to the east parking deck. The purpose there was to run water off the deck and through a sand filter before it entered the stream. All three sets of practices were along College Creek. So that's the feature just behind me here. We're near the headwaters in the park. So today I have a couple of undergraduates who are working with me this summer come out to participate, and they include Calvin Ford, who is a forestry student in my department at Iowa State University, and Ross Curry, who is also an Iowa State student in our wildlife program, animal ecology, and they are both working on a number of projects, but one of them being helping with maintenance here at the buffer. So I'll turn it over to them.
Hi there, my name is Ross Curry, and I'm a senior in animal ecology at Iowa State. One of my favorite things about working at the buffer here in Daly Park is that the sheer amount and diversity of wildlife I see while I'm doing maintenance work. This is actually going to be registered as a monarch way station. We're working with other people to designate it as that, and part of what they do is they go through and count all the different plants, and if you can see around me, that is quite a task, and that's a good thing that we have this many on the site. So this is a common milkweed plant. You can see it's in bloom here, and monarchs use large stands of milkweed plants best because they have more places to lay eggs and more habitat to choose from. Now, monarch caterpillars, of course, eat the leaves, and that's how they become distasteful to birds, and that's one of the major defense systems. Whereas the monarch butterflies then, of course, use the nectar out of the flower. So one of my favorite parts of working out here is the idea that not only are we protecting the landscape and working with homeowners, but we're also working with nature as well.
Hey, I'm Calvin Ford. I'm a third-year forestry student here at Iowa State. Recently, with the coronavirus, we've seen how important having these close public spaces really is. Whenever I've been out here working, it's been very obvious how much these places have been used by pedestrians, either walking, rollerblading, taking their dogs for a walk. I've seen plenty of people stopping by, looking and smelling the flowers, which is an awesome sight to see.
So Ross and Calvin are going to go ahead and do some work while we're out here, and we'll check in with them later. But I just wanted to take the chance to describe a little bit of the structure of the buffer. It is about 800 feet long, this reach of the stream, and we installed a strip of prairie along the outside edge, followed by a zone with trees and shrubs, which we planted in 2007. And then closest to the stream, we have a layer of just trees. So it's a very long, narrow feature in the landscape. We tried to use only native species to the area, and that would be appropriate in a riparian zone. We planted 5 different species of trees to include some diversity in the planting. So we have behind me here a bur oak, a swamp white oak, a sycamore. The tallest trees out here are sycamore. We planted some hackberry, and we also planted some river birch of trees, and then we have several species of shrubs. We planted elderberry, we planted dogwood, we planted also some ninebark, and a couple of other species as well. And then in the prairie strip, we included about 5 species of grasses. Also in the prairie, we included about 15 species of forbs. We did not plant the common milkweed, so there are a number of plants out here that the seed existed on this site, and merely by stopping mowing and letting the vegetation grow a bit, those stands of milkweed came back. We planted a purposefully swamp milkweed to include more later flowering species. So we tried to have species that flower early and then a progression of flowering throughout the season, which is good for pollinator species as well, in addition to its role just for diversity. So that was the plan. The prairie strip is on the outside edge. It's just inside from the trail that goes through Daly Park. And the trail is nice both because people have excellent proximity to the buffer itself and to see the stream feature, but also because it serves as a level spreader for the water. So it's really surprising to a lot of people when they look at a large green space to understand how much water is running off of that lawn. And the entire park area here at Daly Park was actually shaped with bulldozers. It was all graded to have the morphology that it has, and when they do that, they compact the soil. And so we did a number of different infiltration tests to look at the rate of water movement into and through the soil, both in the main part of the park and in the buffer itself. So we were pleased to learn that the buffer itself, in the different zones of the buffer, the infiltration capacity is such that it can absorb all of the water that's contributed to it from the surrounding landscape. And the drainage area in this reach of the stream is about 16 acres. It includes the park and part of the yards of the homes around the park. And the buffer itself is about 4.5 acres and is able to capture all of that runoff. So the reason it's important to use these kinds of features in urban landscapes is because of the other alterations that we've made that really negatively impact the typical natural hydrology of the system in an urban area. So we add houses with roofs, we add sidewalks, we add streets, and all of those surfaces water runs across rather than being able to soak in. This particular feature is one that is designed specifically to increase infiltration of water before it reaches the stream itself. This is one of my favorite little spots in the buffer, and it illustrates a couple of points. There's a really nice patch of rose milkweed here, which is beautiful. About 3 weeks from now, when it starts heading out, it'll have a soft purplish cluster of flowers at the top of the stem. They're really very attractive, and they're also very, very good for pollinators. There are a lot of shrubs that naturally grow in this area. Right behind me is a stand of dogwood that was here before we planted the buffer. Also in the shade of a very large cottonwood tree. So there were a number of trees and shrubs on the site before we planted the buffer. Some of them were less desirable species like honeysuckle and autumn olive, which are known to be relatively invasive and weren't native to this area before. We removed a lot of that, but we did leave a lot of what was here. So you see behind me this large area of cattails. Those are actually the result of a previous Eagle Scout project, probably about 25 years ago, where this was just starting to really serve as a wetland feature in the landscape, and his activities created a much larger wetland area. It's very productive for wildlife. You can hear in the background the red-winged blackbirds chattering at us. They really like the wetland area. It's been home to Canada geese, it's been home to mallard ducks, it's been home to all kinds of wildlife in this area, so it's really a lot of fun. It's also unfortunate that the reed canary grass that you saw more of at the last site and the cattail marsh, those two species, although they are usually native, there are some non-native cultivars, they're also very aggressive. So we have done some work to maintain them in certain areas but try to discourage them in other areas. But this is College Creek as it exits the park, as it moves from Daly Park into a more residential area in Ames. And this is more than likely an unnatural little waterfall that was created when rock material was left here when the neighborhood was constructed. But it made this lovely little waterfall, and I've enjoyed visiting this space often out here. We do have a lot of species of fish, surprisingly, in these small streams. They include spotted dace, a lot of different minnows, not big fish, but small fish. But we did have a surprising variety of fish given the size of the stream. And also a lot of, we did some sampling for macroinvertebrates, and we found a very nice diversity of macroinvertebrates. Those kinds of organisms thrive in shaded water that's kept a little bit cooler than water in open areas. And also when you have a feature like this with some rock or tree branches that create turbulence, that also increases the dissolved oxygen in the water, which is also good for all of the organisms in the water. This is a nice bridge that the city had on site before we installed the project, and it's great. I see people all the time up here looking over the edge, and what you can see is the stream running beneath the bridge, and you have a great vista. You can see fish, you can see dragonflies, you can see all birds of many different species. You can also see, if you're looking for it, storm sewer outlets, which are contributing to the stream flow. So one disadvantage of a surface feature like a riparian buffer is that it doesn't solve the problem of contributions coming from off-site. So it solves the problem of overland flow, but it doesn't solve the problem from stormwater management facilities. And so our historic approach to managing stormwater has been to put it in pipes and channel it to the nearest stream. So this is an area in the buffer that we had the opportunity to plant more prairie. The south side of the buffer has a very narrow strip of prairie, but up here we had more space where we could incorporate a larger expanse of prairie. And again, like the tree and shrubs, we used all native ecotype plant material, and you can see here's some vervain, so some nice purple coloring. Right now it's June, so we don't have as much in bloom, but there are some Indian grass that's starting to head out. All of these tufts of grasses are big blue stem. You can see last year's seed stems from the big blue stem. So we have big blue stem, Canada wild rye, Indian grass among the grasses. And this area in particular has been fun to watch. It's different every year. So if we have a dry year, we'll have more grasses. And if we have a wet year, we have more of everything else just about. And it's just fun to watch it every year. It's different every year. There are different parts of the buffer on this side that do come right up to people's yards. So this is one of the places where we invited a lot of input on design and have worked closely with residents nearby to ensure that they understand the ecology of the buffer, as well as we take into account some of their comments and concerns.
All right, so at this time, I'll invite Jan, there she is, to unmute and join us. And I want to remind everyone that now is the time you also can unmute to ask any questions or submit them via the chat box. So Jan, if you had any quick comments, otherwise I've got a couple questions I can.
Hello, everyone. I'm really glad you could all join us today, and I thank the Iowa Learning Farms for sponsoring this and doing the heavy lifting. It's great to have as many people participate as I can see are here, so that's wonderful. And I was kind of joking with Liz when we did a tech check earlier this week, it's a little challenging to watch yourself on a video and then try to respond to what you said, but I'll do my best. So I'd be happy if there are questions or comments to address those.
All right, so first question I have is, who can I contact to start improving or adding vegetation to a stream that's in a neighborhood that I frequent? So it's not necessarily mine, but it's one that I go to quite often.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it probably depends on the municipality where you live. As I explained in the segment on the buffer in Ames, I worked pretty closely with the city of Ames, initially with folks in public works and also folks in parks and recreation. And in public works in the city of Ames is where the stormwater coordinators and stormwater specialists reside in the city government. And most communities have somebody who is responsible for addressing stormwater issues. So that would be the person to kind of look for in your city, and or folks in parks and recreation. And generally speaking, if it's a very large public space, there may also be a friends group associated with it. At the time that we installed the buffer, there wasn't a friends group at Daly Park, but I know the city of Ames does have friends groups that are associated with various other parks. So I would start with the city government and then kind of go from there.
I've had one come in. Do roadside ditches lend themselves to prairie buffers? What issues are there with county or DOT road departments? So kind of not necessarily urban, but maybe also a stream.
Right. So most road ditches are, ephemeral waterways when we have really heavy rainfall. In general, there is a large program in Iowa, the Iowa Living Roadways, and there is a fund associated with the Living Roadways project where they have actually installed a lot of prairie reconstructions in road ditches throughout the state of Iowa. I believe that effort is coordinated at University of Northern Iowa, and they have a prairie center at the University of Northern Iowa, and the DOT itself has a unit that is very involved in that project. So I would check out what you can find online about the DOT work in that regard. They have worked a lot on the major state highways and the interstates. You see a lot of prairie along those roadways that the DOT has established.
So I've got one here. Have you worked at all with the stream and stream buffer restorations that span across urban residential areas like this one and more rural agricultural areas, so that it kind of has feet in both realms, the urban and the agriculture?
Yeah, a few years ago, I worked with a graduate student who was interested in doing a comparative analysis of the performance of buffers in urban and rural areas. We're still trying to finish that work up. We modeled the design of the buffer very closely after rural buffers, where a lot of work had already been done, research that suggested their effectiveness in dealing with the overland flow. So the design is very similar. The impacts to the stream are, in both cases, pretty dramatic but different. So in an urban setting, the impacts come from largely, activities of people in their yards and at their homes, where they might be washing their car in their driveway, and that would introduce pollutants into the water, or perhaps they're applying fertilizer to their lawn. So it's a similar situation where human activities add pollutants that are then washed across that landscape and into storm sewers, and then ultimately into stream systems, which is analogous to what we see happening in rural areas. In both cases, it's still quite valuable to try to capture that overland flow, but there certainly have been more resources dedicated to that larger scale rural and very productive landscape, at least in the state of Iowa, to also add additional measures to try to deal with, for example, the water that is removed from the landscape in tile systems, using saturated buffers, which are a little more technologically engineered than just the simple 3-zone vegetative buffer that I was talking about. And some of those technologies can also be transferred to urban areas as well.
Roger Gwinnup.
Haven't been as commonly, though.
Not the whole time. It just is like.
Want to just check, Roger, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
No.
Okay. So I know here in Ames, we have the Tedesco Environmental Learning Center that does provide that opportunity for an urban saturated buffer. And we've also had a previous virtual field day about saturated buffers, so you can check that out as well if that's a practice that's piqued your interest. So another question came in. You talked about plant management out there. How did you remove the honeysuckle? Did you have neighbors concerned? Oh, 2 questions. First, how did you remove the honeysuckle?
So honeysuckle is pretty nasty, and it just keeps coming back. We have done a fair amount of cutting. We have dug some up. We have squirted a little bit of liquid death on the stumps where we've cut it. So we've taken, we try to be super, super careful because it is a riparian area. And so when we first did site preparation out there, we did work with a contractor who had a tractor and a winch, and so he did a lot of removing the larger ones, and then the others we just, we continue to do maintenance out there. And I think that's another important thing to bring up. The crew that works with me every summer inherit responsibility for working out at the buffer, and so you all saw Ross and Calvin. They're here today too, so shout out to them for the good work that they do. But we spend probably a total of maybe 120 to 150 person hours each year, each season, growing season, just managing that landscape. And, so that a lot of people think, well, if you put in a natural landscape, you're done. And that is definitely not the case. So it's a very, it's not intensive like the garden around your house, but there is a lot of work to do to remove, noxious weeds that people don't like to see. And, we're somewhat purists about the honeysuckle and some of the other kind of invasive species out there.
So this one kind of has to do with neighbor relations and maybe critters, as they refer to them. Did you have neighbors concerned about critters coming up onto their property, and how did you deal with it? They're referring to a project they know that was removed due to pressure from the neighbors because they maybe didn't participate in the early buy-in to get comments.
Right. So, we had a number of public meetings where we invited all the neighbors to have conversations with us. We invited them to participate in a design charrette to create the actual design for the buffer. It wasn't everyone's favorite thing to have go into their backyard, and so we tried to be very sensitive to people's preferences. We did have folks who were very concerned about having trees in that landscape, and so we did try to create open spaces that didn't include the tree and shrub component. We also had residents who were very concerned about the tall grasses, and in the end we modified the structure of the buffer somewhat where it adjoined people's yards. We mowed down part of the tall grass and put in buffalo grass, which is another native grass, but it's shorter and it's a lot more open, the structure of the stand, and so that was more acceptable to have closer to people's yards. We had one resident in particular that was very concerned about snakes, so we tried to do everything we could to make sure that there wasn't any residue laying around that would invite snakes in particular to live there. And so we just tried to kind of manage those individual elements as we could in response to the kinds of concerns that were expressed to us. Personally, the only wildlife on the site that has been a real problem has been beaver that in multiple years took up residence, and they're pretty destructive to small trees, and they also are the buffer, the trees that we planted, we overplanted assuming that we would lose some. We didn't lose very many, and unhappily the buffer, the beaver didn't remove like every third tree. They just denuded a couple of areas of trees altogether. So we've worked to kind of put in protective devices so that we'd have a little bit less of that kind of damage.
All right, so this is our last one before I go ahead and play Aaron's video. What was done to mitigate some of the compaction in that area? of Daly Park, you mentioned there's a lot of earth moving and compaction that happened.
Right. So the area where we planted that strip of prairie, we pre-treated with compost, and we had again the contractor helped us to spread about a 3-inch layer of compost all along that leading edge of the buffer. And that's a good point, because what we found in subsequent testing is that prairie reconstructions by themselves, and not just this one in the park, but in a couple other places that we've done infiltration testing, the prairie reconstructions don't necessarily enhance that infiltration capacity. And it's important to do what you can to add organic matter to that soil, to also the compost, when first it's put down, is quite fluffy, so it has better porosity and aeration, and that also encourages water movement in through that surface and into the soil. So that's a really good point, that just the prairie itself isn't as advantageous in terms of infiltration as the soil treatment and then the addition of the prairie.
My name is Aaron Gwinnup. I am a water resources engineer with Emmons Olivier Resources, and I'm here in Coralville, Iowa, next to Biscuit Creek. It is a small urban stream. The drainage area is about 1 square mile. It's almost completely urban, and it has developed over the last several decades. And as that development occurs, it puts increasing pressure on the stream, with more runoff and more pollutant loading. And so because of that, there's more need for restoration and stabilization in order to keep up with that development. Biscuit Creek is a really interesting stream. It's always been here, but it used to be a much more rural and agricultural setting. And as the city has developed, the drainage area becomes more impervious, which means there's more runoff and more urban pollutants that stress the stream system as a whole. And so because of that stress, factors like stream bank erosion and invasive vegetation start to creep in and add more pressure and need for stream restoration. So in the watershed of this stream, like all others, are things like schools and houses and driveways and storm sewers. And every time that it rains, the water that runs off of the watershed goes down the yard or the driveway or the rooftop and the downspout, and it runs through pipes or over the land surface, and it runs into the stream. And when it does that, it takes with it pollutants. It might be debris and trash. It might be nutrients such as yard fertilizer or pet waste. All of these things wash off into the stream, and they create problems for the stream ecosystem and the aquatic inhabitants that live there. And so anything that we do in the watershed, as far as human civilization and humanity goes, affects the stream. The stream is where we often see the result of how we live in the watershed. The stream is a reflection of the watershed that serves it. And so the easiest way to keep the stream clean is to keep the watershed clean. There was a stream rehabilitation project done here quite a while ago, over 10 years, I believe. And they cleaned up the stream corridor, removed a lot of the invasive woody vegetation, and planted a bunch of native grasses and forbs. And as you can see, they're doing pretty good. They're getting fairly well established. There is some non-native weedy material in there, as there often is, but a little bit of maintenance will take care of that. Generally speaking, it's a fairly straight stream corridor. It's not very sinuous or meandered, but generally speaking, it's fairly healthy. The Riparian corridor often has a buffer width on each side that has native vegetation. You can see that it's a little bit wider on this side than the other side, but there is a recreational trail over there. I'm sure they were trying to make room for that when they originally laid this out. And again, this is a combination public space. So we have a school and a playground, recreational trail, and they did a pretty good job here of balancing some space for ecology, nature, and wildlife, as well as the human recreational elements for the trail and the bridge and the school and whatnot. When you first build a stream restoration project, the vegetation takes a little while to establish. The earthwork and the rocks and the other engineering elements are pretty quick and easy to install, but the native vegetation establishment takes a while. It takes several years for it to get established, and in that time, that definitely takes a little bit more human input in the maintenance to get those plants established to the point where they maintain themselves after that. And so in a case like this, you have to come in and weed whack or mow the vegetation that does come up to about 8 to 10 inches and keep doing that for a couple of years. That gives the native vegetation a chance to get its roots established and then get up above the ground before all the non-native weedy and woody vegetation gets up and steals all the sunlight. And so this patch here behind me is in pretty good shape. It's been growing for over a decade, as far as I know, and there are some invasive vegetation examples in here. There's some sourdock and woody trees and other things like that that need a little bit of care here and there, but not nearly so bad as some other locations. We'll take a look at another location here on Biscuit Creek in a moment that has had no restoration, at least not recently, and it's pretty choked with a lot of invasive honeysuckle and poison ivy and lots of other woody vegetation. So this section of urban stream is pretty well overgrown, and green is good, right? Well, sometimes it's not quite as good as it could be. This is pretty dense, so aesthetically it's hard to even see the stream, and this is pretty typical of a lot of urban streams. But as well, functionally, this density of woody vegetation is not really helpful for the stream. The root systems from trees and woody vegetation like that aren't that great at holding together a stream bank. They're okay, but not as good as native grasses and forbs. Grasses especially, because they have a really deep, hairy, fine root system, and that acts like rebar in the soil, kind of like concrete. It holds the soil together, so when you get high flows in a stream, the soil and the stream banks hold together really well with that native vegetation. But that can't grow in a shaded woody environment like this. So we'll remove a lot of the woody undergrowth, but we'll leave some of the bigger trees to leave some dappled shade, but we want some full sun areas so that the native grasses and forbs can grow and hold the stream banks together really well. As well, you'll see in the woody vegetation here, there's a lot of nuisance vegetation like poison ivy and things like that. And an urban stream oftentimes is where a lot of kids go to play, and they play outdoors in these areas. I know I did when I was a kid. I spent a lot of time in the stream behind our house, and so that's one reason why I feel it's important to keep these streams in good condition and clean, is because this is where our kids go to play, and this is where they learn to enjoy nature and experience the world around them and observe wildlife. So there's a lot of pollution in the stream that you can see, trash and debris and things like that, and that's obvious. There's also a lot of pollution that you can't see. And when your kids are down there playing in the stream, it pays to think about these things and what's in the water as a result of our human development. There's all kinds of things like nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus. Those get a lot of attention in the Midwest here lately. But there's also a lot of other stuff like heavy metals, cadmium for one. If you think about the tires on your car, you have to replace those once in a while because they wear thin, right? Where does that tire tread go? It goes into the pavement, and that gets washed off every time it rains. It goes into the stream in tiny little microscopic particles, and it's full of all kinds of things like cadmium and other heavy metals. Those tend to get concentrated in our urban detention basins and wetlands and streams, and if they get sequestered in the vegetation and the soil along a floodplain, that's one thing. It's fairly dispersed and it can be broken down or assimilated into nature. But if it gets concentrated in one place, like the stream sediment, then it really starts to add up. And so all kinds of things like heavy metals, PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, these are all products from petroleum combustion. These tend to accumulate in the sediment in our urban ponds and streams. So this section of stream does need some work. It certainly can be improved, and we are considering this stretch of stream for a restoration project. What we'll do is thin out some of the dense undergrowth, and we'll lay the banks back a bit so that they're a lower slope, a little bit safer and more stable. We will revegetate with good native grasses and forbs, and we'll try to add some more riffle pool structure so that it's not just a straight run trapezoidal channel. We want to add a little bit of babbling brook and making the water run over rocks and form pools so that the fish and the bugs have a place to live, and that's a fun place for kids to play as well. It makes a healthy ecosystem, but it also makes a cool neighborhood amenity and improves the way the neighborhood looks. Well, this is Riverfront Crossings Park in Iowa City, Iowa, and this location is the former site of a 24-acre wastewater treatment plant. It was destroyed in the 2008 flood, and for that reason, because we're situated between Ralston Creek on the east and the Iowa River on the west, this site is prone to flooding. And so the city decided to turn this into a floodplain park. For the most part, most of this park is floodable and resilient, and when the water comes up, it's wet, and when it goes back down, it's a city park. And so one of the requirements of the funding that they received from the EPA was that they restore some streams, floodplains, and wetlands when they created this park. And so behind me, you can see a stream oxbow that we built on Ralston Creek to add a quarter mile of stream length and several acres of wetland as well. And so part of the point of that is to clean up the water from Ralston Creek as much as possible before it rejoins the Iowa River. This site is at the base of about a 8 square mile drainage area, and a lot of that is downtown and east side Iowa City. And so it's a heavily urbanized watershed. And so the wetlands and reconnected floodplains here do work fairly well. At times, you might even say they work a little too well because they do tend to accumulate a lot of trash and debris from that urban runoff. The water's up right now from the Iowa River, and so we do get some floodplain backwater effects where the water comes back up Ralston Creek into this wetland area. And then when the water goes back down, we have some resilient native vegetation that will spring back to life and help clean the water of all the nutrients and urban pollutants. So this project is one example where engineers and landscape architects work together to, you might say, de-engineer this site. They removed the wastewater treatment plant and restored this natural wetland system. When we designed the oxbow behind us, we were looking for geometric inspiration, and we found a 1930s map of the original stream that was here before they built the wastewater treatment plant. We traced that outline, and we, within reason, recreated the shape as much as we possibly could when we restored this stream. One motivation for urban stream restoration, which is sort of ironic at this park because it is the former site of a wastewater treatment plant, is that urban stream restoration helps to clean up the effluent of humanity's runoff, kind of like a wastewater treatment plant cleans up the sanitary waste from humanity. All the pollutants and the debris that run off of the watershed go into the streams, and then the streams go to the rivers, and the river goes to the Gulf. And anything that we can do to restore a stream's connection with its floodplains and its wetlands goes a long ways towards removing those pollutants from our civilized, developed areas before it gets into the lakes and oceans. And the restored stream area makes it a lot more aesthetically appealing, increases quality of life, increases ecological connectivity, and creates habitat. It also spurs development. A lot of this area was businesses like lumber yards, and now we've got developing apartments and commercial businesses, and it has spurred new life into this area of town.
All right, so while Aaron's getting himself unmuted here, again, reminding you, you can unmute to ask questions or submit them via the chat box. I did get a couple that came in during your video here, Aaron. First one was there an effort to add meanders during the restoration process? So I'm not sure if they mean the first location or if they mean at the Rivers Crossing Park, so maybe at either location.
Yeah, at the second location, the Riverfront Crossings Park, there definitely was. We added as much meander as we possibly could within the constraints of the park. It was a pretty straight channel before that. The first site, I'm not sure, to be honest. I wasn't involved in the previous restoration. We are still considering that middle location that we visited for a future restoration, and certainly when we do that, we will add as much meander as we can within the space that we have. That's certainly one challenge in urban streams. A lot of them previously were straightened, and that it's definitely a goal to add as much meandering and sinuosity back to the stream as much as possible. But with all the urban development, sometimes there are constraints, buildings and whatnot around that. And so you're a little bit limited in what you can do. So we certainly do everything that we can.
So what can homeowners and businesses that aren't directly next to the stream do that can help with the overall stream health?
Oh, that is an excellent question. There is a lot you can do. As I like to say, stream health begins at the top of the hill. And so the entire watershed contributes to the stream. Anything you do in the watershed to improve the health of stormwater and runoff really helps a lot. So simple things like, picking up pet waste and, give a hoot, don't pollute, that goes a long ways. But other things like installing a rain garden or other stormwater practices that do anything to infiltrate as much water as possible or clean it up on its way to the river helps as well. If you live near a storm intake, for instance, just keeping an eye on that and keeping waste from going down the storm drain really helps a lot to clean up that stream because it all gets concentrated down there. Quite a few people don't necessarily realize that those grates in the street don't go to a wastewater treatment plant. They go straight to the river. And so those McDonald's cups or whatever, they go straight down there too. And so if you live near one, adopt it. Call it yours to keep it clean and see if you can prevent things from going down the tube to the stream.
Someone asked, are any of these types of projects covered by your local TV media? So either both Aaron and or Jan, have you had any kind of coverage on your projects?
Well, so far, Iowa Learning Farms has done a fantastic job. Once in a while, it's not too frequent in my world that the TV media wants to take a look at what engineers are doing around the world. But I don't know, Jan, what's your experience?
So when first we installed the buffer, probably in the first 3 or 4 years, we did have a couple of features on the Ames cable channel because there was a lot of local interest in that feature. But, you know, we've from time to time done some outreach type of work there where we invited different groups to come and observe the park, but not as much in the mainstream media.
All right, so go ahead, Sam. You mentioned that you had a question that you'd like to ask.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. So Riverfront Crossings down there is just below the Coralville Spillway. How did that was that an extra constraint when dealing with flows from the Iowa River, or was it far enough down that it wasn't a big deal?
That's a brilliant question. It is a little ways down. It's several stream miles down the Iowa River, but it definitely was a challenge. When we do a lot of stream restorations, we do research to figure out, you know, how high up the water is going to come and how frequently. And we do a lot of stream assessment as well, just looking along the stream banks for signs of how frequently the water gets how high. And it was really interesting at that location. You could see little dents in the stream banks at fixed elevations, and it took me a while to realize until we correlated with data from the nearby river gauging stations that what we were seeing was specific flow rate set points coming out of the dam. And so, you know, when the dam operators decide how open to make the dam, they set specific levels, apparently, repeatedly. And so we could actually see that in the shape of the stream banks. It as well is a little bit challenging to design a stream restoration project that has water going both ways. That was kind of a challenge there. Usually it all goes downhill, right? But once in a while it comes back up the stream from the Iowa River. And so designing the shape and the hydraulics of the channels and the wetland to accommodate that was it was definitely challenging, but a lot of fun at the same time.
Cool, thanks.
Scott, did you have a question you wanted to ask? All right, so this one's for Aaron. Is the Riverfront Crossings Floodplain Park a unique practice? And has there been interest from other communities in restoring or creating similar parks?
Yeah, there is definitely growing interest. I would say it is relatively unique, but there is more and more interest all the time. I'm a water resources engineer, as I said, and a lot of what I do is helping urban cities get along with their waterways. And as time goes on, we're starting to see more and more communities realizing the amenity that these waterways play. For decades and decades, they were just treated as dumping grounds and someplace where all of the waste goes. And so more and more as communities redevelop, they are, as we say, turning to the river and realizing what a fantastic element they've got, and that with just a little bit of fixing up, they can really celebrate it and make it a cool municipal space. And so I wouldn't say it's unique, but I wouldn't say it's common either. It's definitely a growing field, and more communities are trying to do that all the time. Same goes for floodplain restoration, stormwater wetlands, and other associated stormwater best management practices, like we talked about before, things that clean up the stormwater while it's on its way to the river. There's more and more interest in this all the time, and we're really happy to see it.
So I've got a couple more questions. So this one is referring to your human-made oxbow. Does it have a function aside from recreation appeal, and what might it look like in 10, 20, 100 years from now?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Yeah, there's certainly ecological function One of the main ways that we try to get nature to clean up the water on its way downhill is to slow it down and get it in contact with plants and roots. The more we can slow it down, the more likely fine sediment in the water is to drop out of suspension. So we get that sediment to fall out, and the downstream river is then less muddy. The plants also do a lot to clean up the pollutants. Sometimes they soak up nutrients. The microbes on and in the plants do a lot to break down more exotic urban pollutants. All we need to do is to get it slowed down enough to let those plants and microbes do their work on it. So certainly there's water quality benefits, there's ecological benefits. One concern that we hear about things like urban stormwater wetlands, of course, everybody goes straight to mosquitoes. Isn't that going to make the mosquitoes worse in my neighborhood? Usually those are a sign of an ecosystem out of balance. And if you get the stream hydraulic effects right, that babbling brook effect over rocks, and you get good oxygenated water, as Jan mentioned, you're going to get a healthy community of other things that also eat the mosquitoes. Dragonflies, one of my favorites. They're also called mosquito hawks. And so if you get the whole system healthy enough that you've got all the bugs going, then it can balance itself really well.
All right, so this question is for both of you. What is the best way to advocate for projects like the ones that were highlighted today?
I'll take that one first, if I could. I always like to put in a plug for the Iowa Water and Land Legacy Trust. Contact your state senator and ask them to fund the trust. We all voted for it. All we got to do is put money in it. That would go a long ways towards water quality and soil health in the state of Iowa. There's a number of other methods, though. Organizations like the NRCS are very helpful and have a lot of great resources for things like this, and good folks that can give you great advice about how to implement what's right for your site. Jan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I think also that a lot of the municipalities of size in the state of Iowa are participants in the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, affectionately known as NPDES. And those communities are required, in fact, to do what's called best housekeeping or good housekeeping. So they are strongly encouraged through their permits to install best practices, either as a demonstration or as a means of actually improving water quality outcomes from basically all of the alterations that we make in urban landscapes. So a lot of communities are really being compelled to do some of these things. And I think as citizens and residents of those communities, it's very good to support those efforts, to express that you would like to see, more of those kinds of projects, and we called it for volunteers to help at the buffer for installing it, and a lot of people came out and helped. And so I think if you see a call for some participation, join in.
All right, so this is going to be our last question. Maybe not a simple answer, but are there some simple things homeowners can do to help stabilize creek banks that go through their backyards?
I would say that same theme of native vegetation, that's probably the simplest one. Contrary to popular belief, don't dump your yard waste on it. That seems to be a frequent thing. We see a lot of people. I've personally spent a lot of time walking urban streams, and I see a lot of grass clippings and stick piles and whatnot. And it actually mulches out some of that vegetation that you really want to hold the soil together gives a home for vermin and whatnot. So don't throw stuff on it. Native vegetation is fantastic. And, you know, those are simple techniques. In my world, we get into a lot more complicated techniques involving backhoes and whatnot. But really the starting place is keep it clean and keep good vegetation there.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. This was a great event. Again, this will be archived on our website. If you participated in today's event for CCA credits, I'm going to put up a slide here with that information. So you can send that email to me at ejukums@iastate.edu by 5 p.m. today. I'll put that email in the chat as well. And I just want to encourage you all to come join us again in a couple weeks. That's August 6th at 1 o'clock. We're going to be talking wetland opportunities with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. So I'll put this slide back up and add my email to the chat. And thank you all again so much for attending today.